Okay, get ready.
We're now bringing in Dr. Mena Mirhom. He is a psychiatrist and assistant professor at Columbia University Medical Center. He says that now depression and fatigue are impacting LA County residents. Good morning, doctor. Good to see you. Now, we see that residents are going through a really, really tough time right now. Tell me what you've been seeing as a psychiatrist. Is there anything that you can share in terms of what your clients are going through at the moment?
Absolutely. Good morning, Evelyn. Thank you for having me. What we're seeing, both for patients that I've spoken to directly as well as friends, is that we know that the data is that there's an increased risk of depression and anxiety in the wake of these kind of wildfires. Folks are seeing mass scale grief. And when you're going through this kind of experience, if you are already at risk with a mental health concern, this becomes compounded with this large scale kind of devastation. So it's very important for us to be able to consider what ways we can help folks through this. There are very practical sets of advice that we can share, but we are seeing an increased sense of trauma, essentially, collectively in the community there.
So, and on that note, what do you recommend people do that haven't sought out help yet and maybe are going through a tough time? And even if they're really in the trenches right now, sometimes when you're so in the midst of it, all you are probably only focused on problem solving, and perhaps you forget about asking for help.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a good place to start. The problem solving approach of saying, well, what is the most practical next step that I can control? Once we get past that, a lot of this is an emotional, mental cognition of saying, well, and now I want to reestablish a sense of control and a sense of safety, because the aftermath of these disasters, what happens is we begin to lose control. We begin to feel that the world around us is unsafe. And that sort of feeling can linger past the event itself and make it difficult for us to be able to engage in everyday society. So one of the things that I walk patients through is sort of a 3 R's. One is reestablishing that sense of safety and control. Two is reestablishing a sense of what I can do practically to move forward. And then three is reconnecting or leaning on friends, family, and a faith community. Because in those moments, just as you showed in that segment, if I'm able to help another person struggling through, or I'm able to lean on another person, that can get me one step closer to recognizing, well, perhaps I'm not like my usual self, and now might be a time for me to consider getting some professional help along the way. And there are some indicators that can help get that as well.
And since you're mentioning those 3 R's, also the feeling of loss of control, is that something that has, because I want to talk about the exhaustion part of all this.
Yes.
What leads to this type of feeling, and do you have any tips on preserving that energy or to let your body rest during such intense situations?
Yeah, absolutely. So that feeling will essentially come from a sense of hopelessness, a feeling that, you know what, is there even an end in sight here? With the natural nature of this, of saying, well, the winds are sort of carrying these fires through, inserting some positive news, just as you did there, of saying, well, one of these wildfires is contained, the authorities are sort of on this, there's a path for this to improve and get better. And then on a personal level, taking a step back and saying, well, what can I do to schedule either a positive event or a positive experience with a friend or a loved one, to be able to regain in myself the fact that there is still hope in my world, in my life. As the mayor was saying, if lives are preserved, then there's still hope here. But then if we're seeing that this is still becoming difficult, one thing we need to be able to consider of saying, if we are losing the ability to find that hope, if we are getting into a place where things just look more and more bleak, there could be a time where we get crisis services in line. And the county has actually been great about offering that, as well as SAMHSA from the government standpoint. There are resources that can give you 24/7 crisis support, because in this moment, we are very vulnerable as a community to feel these PTSD or acute stress kind of symptoms that can be debilitating for many people, even though the vast majority of folks are very resilient and with community support can do well and get through this together. We do want to be cognizant of the fact that this can have lasting impacts on us.
Right, and also, like you said, it is also probably a really difficult exercise to train your brain to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And since you also say that reconnecting with loved ones and family and friends is so important, what can they do if we have loved ones that are affected in the area? How can we help and give mental support and reach out?
Yeah, that's a great question. The most important present we can sort of give is presence. And what I mean by that is oftentimes we may be looking for the right word to say or the right expression to make folks feel better, because depending on where you are in this crisis, you might have just lost a home, lost a loved one, lost something that's very, very important to you. So the most important thing that loved ones can do to be able to offer support is to be present, listen when you can, talk when you need to, but don't feel the need to have it all solved or figured out in that moment. The second thing is offering practical support, offering and saying, well, is there someone I can call for you? Can I figure out with you the crisis services? There are a plethora of services that are offered through the county. If you need to evacuate, I can be the one to call for you and figure that arrangement out. If you need a practical move, I can be sort of there tactically for you. But secondly, emotionally, it's allowing the person to lead as opposed to us sort of imposing any helpful tips or moves for them, being present, listening when we can, and letting them walk through their own emotional journey in that moment is so much more impactful necessarily than advice we can give or a platitude of saying, well, it's all going to work out or things are going to be better. We want to do more listening and less speaking.
Right. Very interesting, yes. And on that note, because do you have any tips on, there are also, thousands of firefighters out there. Would that be similar to them? Because how should we keep in mind that maybe they would experience the situation differently, and would there be a risk of them developing a trauma from this, and how can we approach that?
Certainly, the data tells us that firefighters and all those on the front, essentially on the ground there, are at an increased risk of anxiety, depression, and PTSD from these experiences. We see this around several natural disasters. We see this around other sort of calamities as well. So knowing that they are a high-risk population in the same way that they are a higher risk for smoke inhalation or physical conditions that can be associated with fires, the psychological and emotional components are there as well. And this is a very important thing. And if we are friends or loved ones, I oftentimes treat police officers, law enforcement agents, firefighters, and they're a tough group, and they want to be able to say everything's okay and I have to just put my head down and do the task next. A loved one is very important to be able to say, how are you really? Can you share with me how you're feeling? Can you share with me how this is impacting you? And being able to be present for them, but also connect them to care when possible, or encourage them to seek. Maybe you are now at a point where you are burnt out. You've done all that you can in fighting this fire. Perhaps we can get you a little bit of care in the same way that if you were to go in and fight a fire and sustain an injury, we got to take care of you so that you can fight the next fire. And law enforcement, as well as fire department fighters, those are folks who are at increased risk, what we know from the data, so we want to be able to look out for them as well.
Got it. Yeah, very important to have loved ones in that support system to break down those walls sometimes. Thank you so much, Dr. Mena Mirhom. I appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Back to politics.
Thank you so much, Mena, and have a great day.
Thank you. You too.